welcome everybody. I have got Gabriel on speaker view now. So that's who you're looking at, is Gabriel Bump, our guest author tonight. We have 31 of us online tonight, which is huge for our group, which is usually much smaller. So I'm gonna, Dottie, could you let people in as they come in? I'm gonna start the introductions.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. So anyway, welcome, Gabriel. It's really, well, I'm going to start the introduction and we'll improvise as we go along. You grew up in the South Shore neighborhood of Chicago and very coincidentally grew up in the same house as Carla Rotella, who we had on the book club about 3 months ago. Your parents having bought the house, it was the Euclid Avenue house, right?
Yeah, 6918 Euclid Avenue. They purchased it.
Right. So what an amazing coincidence, although this is a neighborhood. So anyway, in the 1990s, Gabriel's parents bought the house from Carlo's parents. And this is where Gabriel grew up. Now, Gabriel graduated from the lab school and went on to the University of Missouri. In 2011, he transferred from the University of Missouri back to Chicago to attend the School of the Art Institute, where Everywhere took root. The book's second chapter, Fog, was his undergraduate thesis. He went from there to the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, where, by the way, my parents graduated from college.
Oh, wow.
Where he, yeah, really. I mean, we're all interconnected. Yeah, where he got his MFA in 2017. Everywhere You Don't Belong was published in February 2020, Gabriel's debut novel. In addition to outstanding critical reviews, the novel gained Gabriel the 2020 Ernest J. Gaines Award for Literary Excellence in Fiction by African American Authors. Gabriel has completed a second novel and is working on a third. I'm sure he'll tell us about that tonight. Gabriel, well, as he explained to us, he's no longer teaching at University of Buffalo. He's moved to University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and is an assistant professor of creative writing. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Gabe, and let you tell us about the book that many of us have just been blown away by, and your experiences in South Shore, in Hyde Park, where we knew you spent a lot of time, and just the whole experience. We're looking forward to it.
Oh, well, absolutely. And then I guess before we continue any further, your name is pronounced Michal, right? Is it Michal?
It's actually Michael.
Michael.
My parents, yeah.
Yeah. Well, because I saw with my brother's name is Michael in all of our correspondence, I was adding the E in my head.
I know.
But I didn't want to be presumptuous. Yeah. So
right. So, yeah. No, it's Michael.
Yeah, well, Michael and Dottie, it's just really, thank you for inviting me here. It's always a pleasure to, I guess, talk about this book and how it came to be with people that at least like somewhat know the landscape, right? At least know where some of the streets are, where the lake is. And so I can just start. Let's see. I was planning on just talking about the time I moved back to Chicago from Missouri. I think is a really good place to start when going over this book, because that's not just where, after I'd started going to the School of the Art Institute, that's not just where like I thought up these characters, Claude and Grandma. Oh, hold on. And then any questions on the chat? Oh, who's Theodore? So this is actually a rapper from Buffalo as a baby. There's a lot of rappers in Buffalo. It seems to be this thing where they all make these like hoodies to sell as merchandise with like pictures of themselves on it. So it's kind of art collecting that I did when I lived there for a while. And now they're just warm and cozy. And so I like so yeah, and feel happy to drop anything into the chat. I know Michael hinted that this will be a little informal, so if ever I'm rambling, you can cut me off because there's so much to talk about here. Like, so creating a book and putting it together. I mean, I've spent about a third of my young life doing this. Right, it took me about 8 years to put it all together. And what I like to think of that pivotal moment in my life when I essentially dropped out of the University of Missouri. I went down there to study journalism at the famed like journalism school, and pretty early on realized that I didn't really have much interest in being, you know, an investigative reporter for the New York Times or something. Like, you know, I had more of an interest in just interviewing people and talking and creating like pictures, right? In this kind of old, purpley, flowery form of journalism, right? Like sitting on a park bench and describing the trees and the wind behind someone's hair, as I wrote. And that's not what journalism is. You know, journalism is calling people 20 times until they pick up, making people angry. I think that I avoid conflict in most ways. And so after a few years and kind of working through also general culture shock of being a young brown-skinned kid from the south side of Chicago, suddenly in central Missouri, with Confederate flags like flying and hanging in, you know, dorm rooms, like flying outside houses. I felt really out of place, right? I felt like a place that I didn't belong, right? And so I decided to move back to Chicago, and I didn't really know what I was going to do, right? Like I certainly felt like a failure, right? And I think some of that has to do with the environment, you know, in which I was raised, right? Like, so I went to the lab school from kindergarten up until graduation, and some of you might know, but I also went to nursery school at Akiba Schechter in Hyde Park. And so, and my family, my siblings went to lab school and were generally, you know, high achieving in their field. And so I was back home living with my parents, trying to figure out what my next move was going to be, you know, and they supported me. They knew that I didn't fit into Missouri. They kind of just wanted me to go someplace that would make me happy. And so I was working in a nightclub, actually, like downtown, like just doing these kind of odd jobs in the semester afterwards, and met some friends who had also recently moved back to Chicago, who I knew through lab school and like middle school, and we were at different times in our lives. And one of them like was going to the School of the Art Institute and said, hey, like you really like writing, you know, that you can like major in writing at the School of the Art Institute. And no, I had no idea you could major in writing anywhere. Right? Like I didn't know that was a major, or, you know, I thought that, because this, you know, this was 2011, right? And then the years preceding, huge daily newspapers were shuttering. I think that my senior year of high school, the Rocky Mountain News closed. The Times-Picayune went to just a twice a week printed newspaper. And so the landscape was changing, and my parents, you know, were really hesitant to let me chase this weird dream of being a journalist. And so you can kind of imagine their skepticism when I said, hey, I want to go to art school to major in writing. And they said, well, what is that? You know, what do you do with that? And I think I made the pitch that most kind of foolish young people who want to be writers do. It's like, oh, you know, I'll learn how to write and I can, you know, transfer that skill to, I think they really want to hear law school. So I said law school, but then my sister, but I had no idea what I was going to do. And I felt just lost, right? Like that I think like most kids that age that face like a sudden shift in expectations, like the world just seems really big and scary. And I was fortunate enough to end up in like really kind classrooms at the School of the Art Institute with just some really smart, talented professors that saw something in me that they wanted to support. Right? And even from my early short stories in classes that didn't have anything to do with Everywhere You Don't Belong, it was just me trying to find my voice and mess around. They actually, like Art Institute, the classes are 3 hours long and you meet once a week, and they're more of a traditional like workshop setting, almost like a graduate school workshop setting. And I remember that they're like an hour and a half, like on the dot in every class, we just get a 15-minute break. And since this was art school, most people just went down to Michigan Avenue and smoked cigarettes, right? So we would go down in this nasty habit, but we're, you know, teenagers, want to be artists. So we'd go and smoke our cigarettes, and like our professors would be out there with us, right? So I would just be smoking with my professor, talking about like, oh, I really love this short story we talked about. I really like this like one move that Stuart Dybek like does in this scene, and we just would kind of talk through those things one-on-one. And it was this experience that was really valuable for me as a writer, like not only to get that like special attention and special instruction, but to see writers that I admired just as like average people, right? Average human. Like I think that I had in my mind that writers were somehow, we must all feel this way some way, but or at some point in our lives, that the writers are, I don't know, kind of like God's gift to earth, right? These geniuses that can like speak in this way that, or they can see the world in this way that like we can't see it, but like, no, I mean, writers just are working at something, right? And they're struggling, right, the rest of us to perceive the world. They're just using like language, right, to kind of work through these, to work through bigger problems, or work through what's happening inside them, trying to figure out the mechanics of a plot. You know, I got to see creative writing as a craft that you have to work towards. And so I just kept working, then ended up towards the end of my couple years at the Art Institute. Graduation was coming up, and I was like, I really have no idea what I'm going to do. And I had a professor that suggested I apply to MFA programs. And again, luckily I have very kind and supportive parents that were okay with me not trying to go to law school, but let me get another useless degree somewhere. And so I applied to UMass and a few other schools. And when I got into UMass, based off of, you know, a writing sample that was pretty close to the first chapters of Everywhere You Don't Belong. And I arrived in Western Massachusetts, which is kind of like a different culture shock than the middle of Missouri, right? Like there, again, like the middle of Missouri, it's this predominantly white space, but there the people are like somewhat like nice and welcoming to you. Again, even if it is this kind of, you know, surface thing. And I feel like there, I didn't totally, I don't know if anyone has spent any time or knows anybody from the Pioneer Valley in Massachusetts, but I didn't really like fit in there, I guess. You know, like I wanted to like drink beer and watch basketball, and that wasn't really a thing that people did there. And so I had professors that I really liked and cared for, had like made a tight group of friends, but I just, for 3 years, almost solely just cranked away at this book that I didn't really know was a book. I didn't know what I was working on until, you know, a couple months into my time there. Like, so for instance, as Michael said, Fog, one of the early chapters, was part of my undergraduate thesis. But the rest of the first half of this book, all of the Chicago and South Shore portions, I wrote in my first semester in grad school during this class called Exhaustion, which my professor, Jeff Parker, I think that he has not taught this class in the same way. I think there have been like different variations, but he has not taught this class again since my first semester at UMass because it was too insane and people were kind of like losing their minds. But it required all the students to write 15 pages of fiction a week and turn it in and workshop. And so you're writing 15 pages, but then you're also reading everyone else's 15 pages. And it was kind of this just really weird, insane, like brain meld. Like we were all just like operating in this different reality from our classmates or everybody else. We're just so concentrated on this, on getting work done for this 1 3-hour class a week. And I think that was really good for me because I couldn't really second guess anything that I was writing. Like I just knew that I had Grandma and Claude, and I can go back to like the kind of the genesis of Grandma and some of the other characters if anyone has questions. But like I just had Grandma and Claude, and the characters just started like adding on top of that as I was messing around with these 15-page sections, like chapters that were originally just like short stories, right? And so it's like, okay, here's Claude as a 5-year-old, and I'll introduce like his 5-year-old friends in the classroom, Bubbly and Nugget. And I was like, okay, well, I want to write a story about Claude when he's 14. And so that's how you get like Chester Dexter and Renaissance and Janice, and all these characters just start coming out of nowhere. And about halfway through that class, like around Thanksgiving, you know, my professor, now like, you know, my close friend, but then my professor and mentor, Jeff Parker, just kind of pulled me aside one day and said, like, you know, what are you going to do with this? And I said, I have no idea. I'm just writing it for this class. And he said, well, man, I think you're working on a novel. So let's turn this into a novel. And I wrote, like finished up the first half, and the class ended when the Chicago chapters ended. And I had some time to sit and think about what I wanted to happen next. You know, I had a winter break, and I remember going home to South Shore and over winter break, and for the first time reading Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. And what I loved most, well, I mean, there's just so much to love about that book, which is still my favorite novel. But what I really loved is how the protagonist leaves home, right, and goes on this adventure and is put forth out in the world, like not just, you know, college failing, but going to New York and seeing what the world is like. And so I wanted Claude to leave Chicago, you know, as I left Chicago, and I wanted Claude to experience life in a totally different environment. And then was also considering, you know, because when your first book is essentially just some like to some degree, there's way more in your first book that is taken from you than there are in books to come. At least that's been my experience, right? And while this isn't a totally autobiographical book, like the action that happens I was never recruited to join a gang in the sense that, like, in the way that Claude was, right? Like I didn't know a basketball player that could dunk and stop crime and these kind of things. But emotionally, like, I'm all over the page in every sense. This sense of kind of feeling adrift, not fitting in, simultaneously falling short of expectations and not being clear what the expectations like even are for me in the world. And so when I came back and came back to grad school after that first winter break, I decided to write Claude in Missouri. And the second half of that book, that's what took me about 5 years to write. It was like just that second half of the book. The first half was, it's like as it is in this book, and it's still bizarre to see, but that is like how I wrote it in those classes. Like there's very, very little changes for the first half to the first half of the first draft. The second half has probably been rewritten, cut, sliced up 8 or 9 times. And I still don't think that I got it right? Like I still don't think that it's, as like we can never get, at some point the book just has to be done. The editor needs it, like everybody needs it. It's going to the presses, like it just has to be done. And I just feel that it's the cool part is that it still feels like this thing that I could mess with, but I just like that feeling, right? Like having this part of the book that I could just tinker with forever and try to get right. And just having this first part, which is exactly how I want it. And I got it on the first try with no real problems. It just came out. And yeah, so I guess I feel like I'm rambling on. So if anyone has specific questions, I can just kind of talk about this different tangents for all day, but I would like to open it up to maybe more of a discussion.
Well, Gabriel, I thank you for that, because it's unusual for us to get an author who gives us such a clear picture of what was going on in his head while he was writing. Yeah. And that, I think, is what this group is especially appreciative of. And so thank you for that. And now I've switched us to the gallery view. So all of you who have, I mean, this was a remarkable book. I finished it a couple of days ago, and I was still shook up in the middle. I mean, fiction does affect me that way sometimes. But also for this group, I think that the South Shore connection, the local connection is also important. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking and open it up for questions.
Well, actually, about the South Shore connection, there is one like funny anecdote that I guess I'd like to share before time. But because it's actually strange to think of, but when this book came out a year ago in February, like I was able to go, for most of my physical tour, right? Like I was flying around the country because nothing was shut down yet. There was this weird virus that was kind of lurking and making its way. I think that actually my reading in Chicago at the seminary co-op was the same weekend that the first, that the COVID case at O'Hare was like found. Like I had like been moving to O'Hare, but I was able to go to Phoenix for an event in late February for a Brandeis luncheon. And it seemed like kind of an odd fit, for me to go to that. But I was in the crowd and I was talking about my book, and then even in the dinners before. But after I like gave my reading and gave a speech to this crowd of, about 400 alumni, I had dozens and dozens of people like coming up to me and saying, well, I grew up in South Shore, right? These were like 70, septuagenarians, octogenarians, like that, grew up in South Shore when South Shore looked different, right? And it's like, well, I lived on Euclid and 71st. Like I remember the old store, and it was just the kind of constant stream of that was really heartwarming. And I mean, it was nice to see like kind of this book being just that neighborhood being special, right? Not being able to just bring people in and connect to kind of know it. So that was interesting to me.
Let me ask a question.
All right, guys.
Yeah, I'm Jean. I'll ask a question. And this is kind of specific, but were a lot of things about Chicago's past talked about in your house? Because I was surprised. I wasn't surprised by a reference to Fred Hampton, because that was big news. But Ben Wilson, he was shot before you were born, I think, right? And so
Yeah.
I remember Ben Wilson's death tremendously, because I was around at the time, and it was a tragic story, but it was, by the time you were able to really appreciate it, it had been 20 years in the past.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your question, Jean. I mean, I think there's just a mix of things, right? So just speaking to the Ben Wilson example, like when I say that I want to be a journalist, right? Like I knew that kind of being an investigative journalist was the best way to make a career, kind of this like high splashy career. But what I wanted most to do was, be if I could, be a flowery sports writer, right? For Sports Illustrated or something. I was always a huge fan of basketball history, right? Not just Chicago basketball history, but sports history in general. Like I've read all of David Halberstam's books, like Red Smith's columns, right? Like things like that. Like, and just a history nut in general, and sports history intersects with my other like interests. So if you know anything about Chicago basketball, right, or have like been to Simeon's gym, like I have, Ben Wilson is everywhere, right? Like, and I think that even when I was in grad school, I think like ESPN did a big documentary on Ben Wilson, right? And I feel like that brought him into the national conversation somewhat, but still not really, right? But in Chicago, that was a real turning point, right, for like high school basketball, and even for how, if you talk to certain people, right, in South Shore, like that was a turning point for thinking of like gun violence, right, in certain parts of Chicago. It's like, man, because I think Ben Wilson was like the 600th person shot that year or something, right? Like it was an extremely violent year. And so even with some of the other references, like Harold Washington is referenced, Nellie Fox, I think we have to cut the Nellie Fox reference out there, but I'm a White Sox fan, so I was just trying to like throw these things into the book and see if anyone would catch them. But part of it is I like lived, that history, right? Like South Shore is, I think, a good example of that. Like South Shore looks different, or looked different in the 90s than it did in the 50s, right? Like in the 50s and 60s. So I should say Carlo and I, grew up in the same house, and neither of our family, which is like, so after I'll tell like how I actually met Carlo for the first time, but, or found out about this tidbit. But Carlo and I, whose families like aren't Jewish, like grew up in houses when there's like mezuzahs like all over our house in South Shore, right? Like on our front door, and even on the second floor leading up to the attic, because we think at some point it must have been like a boarding house, right? There was two entrances. maybe. And so that kind of history was
So-
always just underneath my feet, right? Yeah.
So Gabriel, can you tell us a little bit more about your relationship with Carlo? Because we had him on the book club several months ago. He's an amazingly engaging person, and of course his book was very, very detailed about his life in South Shore, whereas yours was more, I would maybe say, existential. I'm not sure that's the right word, but anyway, he gave us a very, very clear graphic picture of South Shore, and then we segue to you, who lived in the same house. So could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah.
Because we all love him.
Oh, I love Carlo too. I mean, I think that, he's such a smart, kind person, and is very good at what he does. Right. And so I first found out about Carlo when he was researching The World Is Always Coming to an End. He stopped by my parents' house, and like I was, I think, in grad school at the time, but I was like away in Massachusetts, and my parents call me the day after he comes, and he's like, "Gabe, you'll never believe this. This writer used to live in our house, and he's writing a book about South Shore, and we told him about you. We said you're also writing like this book about South Shore, and I hope you guys are able to connect, right?" And we ended up connecting over email, because I taught, when I was in Massachusetts, I taught at this creative writing program in Boston, this nonprofit for teens. And Carlo's daughter wanted to sign up for one of my classes, but like I had already left Chicago at that point, but Carlo just wanted to, he's like, "Hey, this might sound really weird, but I think I lived in your house," that we knew each other. And ever since then, we've actually kept in pretty close contact. And I guess before I get into some of the other questions, I think that like Carlo's book and mine are nice companion like pieces to read, because
I agree.
And he's like writing about the neighborhood in this totally different way, not just from like the nonfiction point of view, but he's looking at it like broadly, right? Like he's looking above and below and seeing like history and trends stacked up on each other, and is explaining like how South Shore is not only the way it is, but how South Shore like reflects the world, right? Like my purpose and my aim was different, right? Well, first, Carlo has been doing this for a lot longer than I am, and has way more experience, and like kind of knows what he's doing more than I am. But I was just writing from a really narrow point of view about a neighborhood, right? It's like, well, what is Claude's experience, like moving through this place? It's and that was the goal. Like I just wanted to show one human's really specific experience in South Shore and in this neighborhood. Yeah.
Right, but that was what was so fascinating to me, was the fact that we had gotten this really large view of South Shore from Carlo, and he slopped over into Hyde Park, as you did. I mean, he had the big picture, and I still remember one of his last chapters where he's talking about walking through Jackson Park, and what it felt like and all that. And then you come up with this character who lives right there in the moment, very specifically in that neighborhood, as opposed to Carlo's bigger view. And so you see what happens between Carlo's sort of journalistic view and then your emotional view of it. And so to me, that was amazing to put the two together.
Yeah, and actually, I think those books should be solely sold together, like in some kind of bundle, right? Which I've advocated. I've advocated for.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Wait, I think I see. Well, I guess I see Cade left. I think I see Cade was my dentist. I just like, I'll ask my mom, but if you're still there, I see. My mom thanks you for helping my teeth. So Barbara, I could answer Barbara's questions. Or start here. Share character development for Martin Jr., their father. And so maybe I'll start with the big Columbus question. I guess all these have to do with the second half, so I can just speak more directly to that. Well, so first, I had no idea how I wanted this book to end. And I think that was, or that's a typical shortcoming of debut authors, is like you're just so focused on putting this thing down on paper, right? And like you're so focused on getting to the end that you don't know what happens like once you get there. Right. And so for me, this was the hard part, right? Like, so the first draft of the second half of the book is things kind of ended in this like Sopranos style showdown between like Claude and Big Columbus and the Red Belters, like Claude had gone to school in Missouri and discovers that like the Red Belters are like selling drugs in this college area, and like Claude tries to like bring down the operation. And it was this thing that was hard to believe. Right now, I can't believe that like I wrote it. But when I got an agent for my book, my agent in no uncertain terms said, you have to do this differently. This isn't what this book's about. This book isn't like a crime drama, right? This book is a story about a kid. So how do we make it about the kid? And so it took a few drafts, like shifting the focus around away from Big Columbus and the Red Belters and putting it more on Claude. And I mean, this is the benefit of having really smart people on your side and reading your work. Like my agent is a very smart and kind person. And she told me, I think after she was pretty exhausted of going through all these drafts with me, she had said, Gabe, like, bring Janice back. Like, you know, you don't have to bring everybody back, because she missed all of the, like, and this is something I've heard about the book since it's been out in the world, like people miss the characters in Chicago when Claude leaves to Missouri, and that's fine. You know, I miss them too, but I think, you know, in life we have to leave home, right? We have to see what life is like without our immediate family. But she said, bring Janice back, like, just see what happens. And so the second that I knew that Janice was going to meet with Claude in Missouri, the story just made a lot more sense to me, I guess. You know, it ends up ultimately being a weird love story in a roundabout way, right? And I think that like Claude's relationship with Janice is really important to me, but then also like carries the story once it kind of gets tied up in the second half. But how did
it's in there?
Yeah. So how did I know that I was finished with the 8th draft? Because we had to go to the printer. I mean, I knew that I was comfortable with it, you know, as it was. Like I knew that I liked it. I felt like I had written the book that I wanted to write, right? And I think that's like really important, right? Is that like even though I had changed some stuff and moved some things around, I just knew that like this was the book I wanted to write, and whether people liked it or didn't like it, like I just wanted most of that onus to be on me, right? Like I didn't feel like I wanted to really change anything like totally away from whatever vision I had of it. Because even at Algonquin, the sales department like really wanted Claude to never leave Chicago. They wanted Claude to just like stay there and stay with Grandma and Paul. And I said, well, that's not the story I want to tell. And again, I had a very tough editor that stood up for me in that instance. And that's a sign that you're with people that have your best interests at heart. And then so the character development for Martin, Juna, and her father. Well, with Martin, Martin, I guess there's not much character development besides me just really liking supporting characters, right? And me just trying to get the most, and trying to make sure every character offers something on the page and leaves the reader with something. With Juna and her father, there's actually a story behind like choosing them to be kind of the crux of this. And like I was in grad school, and I just turned in a first draft of this where Juna and her father weren't characters in the first draft. And I suddenly had all this time or I had like a couple weeks off to just, as grad students do, kind of just mess around, read what I want to read, and study what I want to study. And I woke up really early, like at 4:30 or 5 o'clock on a Saturday. I just couldn't get back to sleep and was on the couch, and suddenly Indian Premier League cricket was on ESPN or something. I don't know if anyone has ever seen this it's called short format cricket, where it's this big spectacle, like stadiums packed with people, fireworks and like cheerleaders. And I was like, what is this? Like, what am I watching? This seems like the coolest thing I've ever seen. And so I started reading a lot of like cricket history, which of course brought me to just South Asian history in general. And I just became very interested with other forms of like otherness in places like Missouri and America, right? And so Juna and her father, while their experiences are in a lot of ways much different than Claude's, right? They can relate to the sense of being like unwanted in this country, right? They can relate to feeling under threat, right? When those kind of white boys come lurking around, and so yeah, it's just a mix of wanting Claude's experience to be shown through a different lens, and then just getting into this like my weird interests like getting shown through. So there's a scene where Juna's father is explaining cricket to everybody, right? Like that's not for any kind of storytelling reason besides just my weird interests and wanting to like put just some things that I really love in this book. Yeah.
That was nice that you gave Juna's father something to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm serious. It made him a real person, and I like that.
Yeah, and that's one of the one of the great things about fiction, but also one of the pitfalls sometimes is like I hate reading flat characters, right? Like I think that when I write, as I said before, I think that every character should bring something to the story. It should like leave the reader with something. So if you read this book and only came away knowing more about the rules of cricket, I think that's okay. That's beneficial to me.
I would like to find out what happens to Grandma and Paul without having a kid to raise. That would be interesting to revisit them sometime. I don't know if you're interested though.
Yeah, so this is, it's kind of interesting talking about this book because I'm actually currently in the process of kind of like rewriting the whole thing. So I'm adapting this for television, right? Or like working through an adaptation, and like the storytelling medium, like what you can do is totally different in like film and television. That is just on the page, right? And so, and especially when you're imagining, not just one season, like one season, but like three or four seasons coming down the road. And one of the cool things about imagining this TV series is like, yeah, in season 3, when Claude, or season 2, like when Claude's off at college, and like we're able to not be just in Claude's point of view. Like, what are Grandma and Paul doing on a Friday night when it's just them in the house, right? Like for the first time in decades. So I will be returning, but I think then like a sequel as a novel isn't something that I would put myself through again. I think I care about these characters too much to keep bullying them, make them do what I want. I could come. Oh, sorry.
So Gabriel, that's interesting. So I had read that you had perhaps been thinking about a movie, but now we're hearing that you're thinking about a TV series with these characters. I mean, that would be fascinating to see them all develop.
I mean, like this whole process is, well, thanks for saying it would be fascinating. So I'll let them know that we have people that would watch it. One person that would, but like there's just so many things that have to
come on, Gabriel. Who cannot be fascinated by Grandma? With her weird clothes, and Paul and their relationship, and the characters are so bright that
and that's what we're hoping. Yeah, that's what we're hoping for. I think, but there's just so many variables that I'm kind of learning, right? It's like, well, I guess the one variable is who would be willing to pay for such a thing, and then also who would be willing to watch it. So originally we were kind of talking about a film, and I last summer was writing some like screenplays even, and sending them out to people, which just every writer is doing nowadays, I guess. Like there's just such this desire for content. And I ended up speaking to a production company. I think all this is being announced pretty soon. So it's a Concordia Pictures, which has just been, well, is newish, but has produced some really great documentaries recently, like Time being one of them, which is just nominated for an Academy Award. And so I just had a conversation with the heads of their fiction side of things. And after about an hour of going through the plot, like trying to talk to my vision, their vision, they just decided, well, why not just try for a TV show and see what happens? Because I feel like a 2-hour movie wouldn't be able to capture the book, right? It just feels like there's too much happening. And again, like the characters that you wouldn't want to know, right, Michael? So yeah, I mean, that's just another, I thought I was done with this book forever when it came out, but it does not look like that's the case, at least for the foreseeable future. Who knows?
So it was the evaluation of the production company. They saw it going more to TV than film.
Yeah. And well, one reason why I really like this production company is because, like, I don't know, they just seemed really open to that. I mean, like, what I did learn is that LA is and Hollywood is a totally different world than what us just sad little fiction writers do in our rooms. So I think I much prefer writing books to working with Hollywood types, I guess. They're all smart people and kind people in their own right, but I just like something different, I guess.
Yeah, I would just like to say that my preference is for PBS, and
Yeah,
some
me
of
too.
the really quirky characters you get on something like, Doc Martin or all of those PBS stories that focus on really well-defined odd characters. I think that's perfect for your book. Maybe you should go talk to PBS rather than Hollywood. But anyway, I can
That's not a
see
bad idea.
those characters being something like all creatures great and small. I mean, ordinary people who turn out to be extraordinary. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm inserting myself too much in this. We have one more question, which is, and I hope you will talk about this. I know you have one book in the can and one book that you're writing. So can you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah. So I'm actually working on, I guess like a third draft. The draft numbers kind of evade me. They all blend together at some point. But my second novel, which is under contract with Algonquin already, so there's a little less pressure on that one because I know that like they've already purchased it in a way, right? So I feel, I mean, it's a different book.
Does it have a title?
It does have a title. It is the New Naturals, and it's about a utopian society. Well, these academics in Boston that create this utopian society in Western Massachusetts, and it follows, it's third person, and it follows different like close third points of view for these groups of people that are either living in the utopia or trying to find their way there. People kind of lost in the world and searching for a place to call home. And the book really starts when the utopia is failing, like all utopias end up doing. And so, yeah, I like, different, bigger, a lot more focus on different characters. But in a lot of ways, deals with the same subject matter, right? Like just lost people in the world, trying to find each other, searching for where home is. And then I'm actually, and I guess before I can answer Mary's questions, so I'm working on a third and a fourth book too, right? So these things just kind of keep coming, and I can't really stop doing it. And it's all a wonderful mess, right? But what's pretty interesting is that I think that Everywhere You Don't Belong, at least for now, is the only Chicago book, right? Like I plan on writing, right? I felt like I just had to write a South Shore Chicago book, and well, Missouri too. So it's kind of weird to see like my creative interests kind of leaving home permanently. It kind of feels like, I don't know. I mean, now hopefully my home will be North Carolina for several years, so we'll see what that brings. And then Mary, can you say something? Yeah. So I guess what's kind of interesting too about working on this show, while like Judas and the Black Messiah has come out, like I watched it too, and I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, watching it. I think it was pretty interesting. Like I'm imagining like Big Columbus, right? Like in a similar role as Fred Hampton, and I feel like the Big Columbus in general, in a lot of ways, was inspired by Fred Hampton, right? It's kind of like Big Columbus is this bastardized version, I think, of Big Columbus. Fred Hampton was purer in heart and mission, I think, than Big Columbus was. For me, thanks, Barbara. Well, I don't know what screenwriting career I would want, but the novels are fun. So have a good night. So with Fred Hampton and Big Columbus and characters of that ilk, like I don't know, like, because when I was in high school at lab school and I worked for the newspaper, one like subject that really got my attention and like I really leaned into was reporting on gangs, right, on the south side of Chicago, and talking to police officers, right, talking to people that work for the public schools, like what is happening with this violent surge, because if you probably remember, 13 years ago, Chicago was experiencing a spike in violence that it hadn't seen, right, since the early 90s, like late 80s. And I guess even now it's experiencing another spike in violence, if my understanding from a distance, is correct. And there was a moment when like South Shore was, there was a year or two where South Shore had the highest violent crime rate in Chicago. Right? And it wasn't just, I think Inglewood and like North Lawndale, I think had more like murders during the year, but South Shore had the highest rates of like murders, like carjackings, like violent crimes. And one of the reasons that was put forth to me, like during an interview with, like I think maybe even the person in charge of the Chicago Police Department's like gang unit, he said that the reason this was happening is because all of the gang leadership for the traditional black gangs, like the Gangsters, Disciples, and the Vice Lords and stuff, all those people were in prison. And what was happening now is that you just had these 15 and 16-year-olds with guns that were upset with each other and were shooting at each other and were killing each other. And there was no structure, right? Like to the structure in the sense that we think about like in the mafia, right? There was no one saying, no, you cannot shoot this person because that will like bring unwanted attention to it. Like there was no mediation happening within these organizations because the organizations were crumbled. And so when I set out to talk about violence in South Shore, I wanted to imagine a gang with an actual like figurehead on top of it, right? And I didn't just want I don't know, like I didn't just want some like a character that was ripped from Law and Order or something like that. Like I wanted a more like philosophically complex gang leader, and that's how Big Columbus like came about. And like I'd known about Fred Hampton growing up, and just and more generally the Black Panther Party as a whole. And so I felt that I wanted to lean more on the criminal element for Big Columbus, but also tie in, right, this philosophical social activist level. And the TV show's a little bit different, but.
Well, I mean, isn't that all about Hyde Park and South Shore and Woodlawn and all of our neighborhoods? Is we can't just have plain old criminals. They have to be philosophical criminals.
Yeah, that's the effect.
So anyway. Okay. Do we have any other questions from the group? This has been really an amazing evening.
Yes, yeah.
All right,
I think
this is your last
Tyler
chance.
went to lab school too, didn't he?
Oh, what's that?
Rotella went to lab school too.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
The odd thing that you both you lived in the same house, you went to lab school, you became writers, And if I were an editor and this were fiction, I'd say, no, you can't do that. That's too absurd. It would not happen. So anyway, I do love it though.
Well, and I mean, I think that there's, like, I think it's not totally random, even like if you think, because even Carlo's brother is also a writer, right? And like is a writer and a journalist. And for me, like there was something about leaving South Shore every day to go to lab school, right? Like even if like the Highlands was this really pristine, like part of the neighborhood, right? Like kind of like either driving or taking the bus, like up Jeffrey, down 71st Street, up Stony, and into Hyde Park. I mean, you see like two different Chicagos every day, right? And I feel like for me, like for, I was gonna say for as long as I can remember, but I think I could probably pinpoint it, right? Like up until when I was a teenager and started to kind of understand the world a little bit more, right? Like understand kind of like income inequality, right? Segregation and these things. And I just wanted to figure out why this stuff was happening, right? Like I wanted to figure out like why, like 2 blocks away from me on 67th Street, were there always cops like chasing people, or like why were people getting murdered so close to my house? But then if I just took Lakeshore Drive up to, like one of my best friends growing up lived on Belmont and Melrose. And it's like, well, why is his neighborhood so much different than my neighborhood? Like, why do his parents let us like walk on the streets at night and like go wherever we want? But like my mom, won't really even let me leave the house after it gets dark, right? And I feel like just these natural questions being posed all the time, just like I guess Carlo can relate to this in some way, right? Like, and then in a lot of ways, we're just kind of screw ups that found the one thing we're good at. And somehow put that to use. I think that's probably closer to the truth. I think Carlo.
I remember Carlos.
High school, yeah.
Yeah, remember Carlos' comment about being a stoner.
Yeah.
Walking through Jackson Park, I'm not sure everybody understood what he was talking about. I certainly did, but at some point you want to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I enjoyed seeing the books you posted on Twitter that you'd read during February.
Oh yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that was great.
No, I have all this time to read now.
No, it's great. It's great. Keep that up.
Yeah. No, I'm actually already thinking of the stack for March.
Oh, good.
But I feel like I was reading a lot of like Italian literature in translation, and it's more like cerebral stuff that for the past week I've been reading just like John Grisham novels. And I think like Grisham is actually fascinating. One is because how do you make $1 billion writing books? I guess he's like close, he's like pretty close to having $1 billion, and it's just this really bizarre thing. But then like he just is so obsessed with clarity and pace and plot, right? And like he says this in interviews, he's just like obsessed with it, and he just feels like that's how you connect to a reader. And which I've always known in some ways, and I think just like reapproaching his work like as a writer first, like after publishing a book, and as someone that's like wants to write more books and like have a career. I just have this different idea of John Grisham than I did as just this person that these boring books that boring people read or something like that. Like but from when I was a child, but I'm actually really enjoying it in a way. Like they're fast and having time. Yeah.
All right, this is the last call for questions for Gabriel. Do you have anything else?
So I just have one
Well,
more. So Gabriel,
sure.
I don't have to tell you this, but I have a couple of friends who've been in book publishing and they speak so highly of your publisher, so of Algonquin. So
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a bad thing to say.
you don't have any complaints.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it goes just beyond what they've just done for this book, right, Dottie? Like, I mean, like I was saying before, like there were some people in the company that wanted me to kind of just change the book, like fundamentally, right? And like I just had this really sweet, really kind editor who's still my editor, right? And I hope is my editor forever for as long as I'm writing books. But she just really stuck up for me without even telling me about it, right? Like without even saying that, you know, I'm really fighting for you. Like it was just one day she called me up and said, all right, Gabe, I've been like keeping the jackals at bay for for months and months, but we have to do something. Like we have to figure out some way to satisfy them with this book, and we made changes. But really, I think speaks to the publisher that they like listen to an editor like that, right, and have faith.
Right.
And the book went out in the world and is doing fine. Right? I'm no John Grisham is still atop me on the bestseller list and will be in perpetuity. But they just want me to write the books I want to write.
It's great.
Me. And I mean, even more important than that, like they got me this job at UNC.
Wow.
Yeah, there's so like a beloved faculty member and this an absurdly talented writer, Randall Keenan, passed away unexpectedly last summer. Just this total tragedy that ripped through the community. And one of the professors at the creative writing program at UNC, who knows my editor, Kathy, she actually published his first book, I think his first couple books. He asked, is there anyone you think that we should, like, would be a good replacement for Randall, like anyone that you know that could do it? And she offered my name up. And that's, you know, several interview rounds and bureaucracy later. Like I'm here and like my editor is my neighbor and I took a walk with her a couple of days ago, right? North Carolina. And so, I mean, it's, yeah, like Algonquin is an amazing publisher and has always done right by me, but they're in many ways like have changed my life more than once, always for the better, and treat me like family, and I feel like they are family. And that's rare. Right. You know, that stuff doesn't happen all the time. Yeah.
Thanks again. That was really fun.
Oh, thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming.
Well, I'll come next year when you come back with your second book, okay?
Oh, okay. That's putting pressure on me to finish it. All right.
Well, you're the publisher already, right? It's already wrapped up at the publisher.
Well, it's getting there. It's
yeah.
getting there. We're close. So we're hoping.
We will definitely have you back. Even if the subject is no longer Hyde Park, you are a Hyde Park South Side author and dear to our hearts. So
yeah. Well, I hope so.
Thoroughly enjoyed tonight.
Great.
We're so grateful that you joined us. So anyway, we have been recording this session. At some point it will be available on our website and I'll let everybody know about that.
Okay.
And now I would like to say just a few words about what's coming up in the next month or so. And I'm going to switch myself.
Everybody have
a
good night. Oh,
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Gabriel.
Thanks. Oh, and
Thank
then
you.
actually, maybe I'll talk to Carlo and see if we can publish our next books at the same time, and maybe
That's a great idea.
Exactly,
Or
and
maybe
maybe
a
both of-
conversation with the two of you.
yeah. We're
Yeah.
actually we're doing that at some academic panel, I think, in the fall.
Oh, really?
We're having our first kind of official
Okay.
event together.
It'd be really fun to hear about South Shore from the two of you together.
Yeah.
That really would be fun.
Yeah. Well, it's fun for me just talking to him about
Yeah.
it. Well, okay. Well, everybody have a good night. Stay warm.
All right,
Bye, thank you.
thank you, Gabriel. Thank you. All right, before everybody else leaves, I just want to explain what we're doing the next time around. Our next book is going to be 50 Chicago in 50 Objects with Joseph Gustitis, who we've had here before. So that is going to be our April meeting. And then for May, we have a very nice program about Len Dupre. And this is his book, Challenging the Daily Machine, which is a Hyde Park classic, a Chicago classic. And we have got special guests joining us for this meeting. Tom Geoghegan, who was Len's partner and longtime friend, and of course, Bob Dupre, who is Len's son. So those are the next meetings coming up. And you will be getting announcements about all of them. And I want to thank you all for joining us. And good night, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate
Good
it. This was fun. They're all fun. Bye-bye.
Hi.
Good night.
Bye.